The Timberwolves have a chance to make their third straight trip to the Western Conference Finals. Standing in their way, a 62-win Spurs team led by one of the best players on the planet. No Anthony Edwards, no Dante DiVincenzo. Do the Wolves have what it takes to overcome the injuries and win yet another series? Or are the Spurs simply too much to handle? These are the questions we're going to be answering in today's video brought to you by PrizePicks. But first, we'll have to figure out how the Wolves plan to score without their starting backcourt. Even without Ant or Dante, they still have a pretty strong rotation of guys who can space the floor and put the ball on the deck. Jaden McDaniels and Naz Reid have both been reliable shooters all season long, while having enough skill to operate out of ball screen situations, work off of movement, or beat closeouts. Julius Randle's one of the biggest mismatches in the league. Anybody strong enough to hang with him in the post likely isn't quick enough to cut off his drives, so he's constantly putting pressure on the paint in a variety of ways. The same goes for Ayo Dosunmu, who stepped into the role of a lead ball handler. He likes to play quick, downhill, and it's tough to keep him away from the rim. Not to mention Terrence Shannon Jr., who seems to get 2 feet in the paint quite literally whenever he wants. In round 1, the offensive game plan was simple: go at Jokic in the paint. Denver didn't have good enough point of attack defenders to contain the ball, so they could create straight line drives pretty much whenever they wanted. Then, because Joker doesn't offer any sort of vertical presence, while the Nuggets also missed both Aaron Gordon and Peyton Watson due to injury, they just had a field day in the paint. Things aren't quite that easy against the Spurs. Not only do they have the better, more athletic perimeter defenders, they have the ultimate vertical presence. Here's a look at every team's defense at the rim this season. From left to right is how often offenses get there, and from top to bottom is how well they shoot. As expected, OKC, Detroit, and Boston set the standard. Teams can't beat them in the paint. What if I told you that the Spurs during Wemby's minutes were even better? It looks different with San Antonio though. Usually when your defense is built around taking away the rim, you're choosing to give up more threes because it means you're bringing more help. The Spurs don't have to pack the paint to have a top tier rim defense because Wemby's a one-man deterrent. He takes away that space from entire teams. So they want their perimeter defenders to be aggressive, applying constant pressure, closing out hard, running shooters off the line, and funneling the ball into Wemby. But you can't score on him at the rim, so what does that leave? The mid-range. Offenses have to find a way to survive on a diet of 2-point jumpers and floaters if they want to beat the Spurs. That's the first major key for Minnesota. Guys like Jaden, Naz, and Randle are gonna have to be dialed in from the mid-range. If not, they're gonna have to find a way to get Wemby out of the paint, which, unfortunately, I don't think they really have the ability to do. He's obviously gonna be matched up with Gobert, which begs the question, how can the Wolves actually utilize Rudy on offense? Usually he's the one setting ball screens. He's a massive screener, which helps get those guys open, and he's a vertical finishing threat, so that's how they often put pressure on the paint. This is where you really miss Ant though, because there's nothing stopping Wemby from just sitting way back in deep drop coverage. I'm expecting them to test Minnesota's pull-up jump shooters. From 3, Ayo, Bones, Conley, and even Naz are probably going to find themselves walking into lots of open space. They're going to have to make the most of those opportunities. And then, of course, those other guys I mentioned are going to have space to get to the mid-range. Can they hit shots at a high enough clip to produce good half-court offense? If not, Wemby has no reason to leave the paint, which then means Gobert's no longer a threat to roll, they don't have to bring any extra help from the perimeter, and you're not able to get them into any sort of rotation. There's always the option of taking Rudy off the court and going to a 5-out look with Naz and Randle in the front court. While I think we'll see that in spurts, I'm not really sure if it's a viable option because then they'd have no chance of keeping San Antonio out of their paint. The biggest test for the Wolves in this series is going to be finding ways to score with Rudy on the court. I think what we'll likely see is him spending most of his time in the dunker. There's just one problem. Now Wemby's playing free safety. You aren't scoring in the paint. However, this is where Minnesota can take advantage of their size. One weakness you could point to with the way the Spurs are built is that they don't have a ton of front court size next to Wemby unless they go double big. In their main 5, they're relying on Julian Champagnie and Devin Vassell to occupy those forward spots. Off the bench, they've got Keldon Johnson, Harrison Barnes, and sometimes Carter Bryant. Think about that compared to the Wolves, who in Game 6 against Denver debuted a jumbo lineup that featured all 4 of Jaden, Randle, Naz, and Gobert. So in situations where Wemby has to leave Gobert to help at the rim, and some of those other guys start to crash, will they be able to keep them off the glass? To me, that'll be the biggest thing to look out for. The Spurs are gonna have to close possessions. Do not let the Wolves get second chance opportunities, because that's when they'll be able to access the paint or create wide open threes, which then trickles down into how they approach help defense, committing an extra body or two to the paint early, leading to those kick-out situations that can get them into rotation. Of course, that all starts with making Wemby commit to the ball, which means that the Wolves are gonna have to win their matchups one-on-one. Earlier I mentioned that Randle's a big mismatch problem. If they go to their normal starting five, Stephon Castle is probably the one drawing that assignment because he's the only one quick enough to cut him off while having the strength to absorb contact. But even then, he's just a lot smaller than Randle, as is their main option off the bench, Keldon Johnson. I think he can help push Randle out of the paint, but he doesn't have the length to limit those short mid-range buckets he loves to go to. Not to mention, what's stopping them from hunting for the switches they want? None of San Antonio's other wings or guards have any chance against him, and I'd expect the Wolves to implement lots of screening action involving their smaller guys. That doesn't only apply to Randle. If Ayo gets a slower defender, he's really tough to contain. If Jaden or Nas get a smaller defender, they both have the ability to just rise over the top. It might not always look as pretty or as effortless as when Ant's out there, but if they can seek out favorable matchups, win the one-on-one, and force Wemby to commit, they can start to unlock both the rim and the three-point line at least a little bit. Unfortunately, that's a lot easier said than done, and in bench minutes, Kornet is still one of the better rim protectors in the league. I think Minnesota's offense mostly comes down to pull-up shot making and guys rising to the occasion, which probably won't be very efficient. So, just like in the Denver series, they're gonna have to make up that ground on defense. But before we get into that, I want to thank PrizePicks for sponsoring today's video. If you know you can play responsibly and you have the means to do so, PrizePicks is America's #1 daily fantasy app. So if you're looking for a place to get in on the NBA playoffs, use code HMA and get started. Game 1 is coming up in a few days. I know we haven't talked about the Spurs offense yet, but I think Fox's mid-range game could play a huge role, and I'd expect him to start the series aggressively. We'll take him for more than 17.5 points. On Minnesota's side, any one of their big forwards could get going. Naz Reid to me feels like a guy they'll lean on because of his three-point shooting and ability to attack smaller wings. I've got him for more than 11.5 points. It's that simple. Find the stat you want, pick more or less, and you've got your lineup. If you sign up for PrizePicks with code HMA and play $5, you get $50 in lineups instantly. So download the app or click the link in the description to get started and let me hear your picks down in the comments. You can make the argument that there's no team who puts more pressure on the rim than the Spurs, and that starts on the perimeter. In their starting lineup, they've got De'Aaron Fox, who's still just a blur of speed with the touch to finish in any way imaginable. Next to him in that backcourt is Stephon Castle, whose burst and power give him unlimited access to the paint, with the verticality to go up over most rim protectors. Their best driver might be coming off the bench though. 20-year-old rookie Dylan Harper gets all the way to the rim with ease. Between his change of pace, balance, and overall poise, he can read just about any defense and navigate tight spaces on his way to the basket. Look no further than Game 3 against Portland. Wemby was out with a concussion, and he responded with 27 points on 90% true shooting. That's just the backcourt though. Keldon Johnson's an actual bulldozer who can go through just about anyone on his way to the basket. And if they decide to go with Harrison Barnes at any point, he's still got a little bit of juice as a driver as well. With the way they do their rotations, they basically always have 2, maybe even 3 of these guys on the court at the same time, which immediately causes problems for any defense. In the case of Minnesota, where can you hide guys like Mike Conley or Bones Highland? Neither of them should be playing big minutes, but they're needed at times to handle the ball and space the floor for their bench units. And it feels like that's when a guy like Dylan Harper will relentlessly hunt for them. That's without even getting into the fact that all of these slashers are operating next to Wemby, who might put more pressure on the rim than any of them. It looks different. Sometimes he'll handle the ball, isolate in space, come off an inverted ball screen. Sometimes he'll spot up on the perimeter, attack a closeout, and get downhill that way. But it's the off-ball rim pressure that warps everything. When he's in the dunker, or screening and rolling, or just cutting, the entire defense collapses because if he catches the ball within 5 feet of the basket, he's gonna score every time. For this reason, teams often choose not to leave him at all. Instead of risking a lob, they'll either trust their defenders to contain drives one-on-one, or send help from elsewhere, which then frees up the perimeter. That's why they like to run both Champagny and Vassell in their main 5. Those are 2 high-level catch-and-shoot guys, both hitting almost 40% on serious volume. The same goes for Barnes off the bench. And a kinda sneaky overlooked stat is that all of their slashing guards have been mostly reliable, making over 37%, albeit on limited volume. The only guys below 36% have been Keldon Johnson and Carter Bryant. As a defense, your challenge is to take away the rim from all of those slashers and from Wemby as a play finisher without giving up corner threes to their shooters. So how do you do that? Let's start with the Wemby variable. Assume for a second that Rudy's got the matchup. He can space him out as an above-the-break shooting threat, and I wonder if the Wolves concede those looks like they did with Jokic. It'll be interesting to see if his three-point volume sees a noticeable climb. If he's consistently making them pay for leaving him open, that starts to free up everything. For example, when he picks and pops, those ball handlers are looking to turn the corner with speed. How do you guard both? More importantly though, how do you guard the pick and roll? Like I said, you can't let him catch the ball within 5 feet, and definitely can't let him open up enough for a lob. But if Rudy's forced to step in front of a drive, that means Help has to fully commit to the paint, which then unlocks those corner threes. Between the fact that they have so many ball handlers who can put pressure on the rim, and the greatest lob threat in the sport, it's impossible to let them turn the corner with an advantage unless Rudy's the one coming over. That leaves the Wolves with 2 options. They could either switch across the board, trust everyone to hold their matchups one-on-one and not let them gain a numbers advantage, or they could switch the matchups. Put Nas or Randall on Wemby, which unlocks a little bit more versatility in the screen and roll. You can still switch, but you can also mix in some hedge, some drop, keep those guards guessing and having to make real-time decisions while Rudy rotates behind the play to protect the rim. In the regular season, we actually saw them close multiple games with Randall on Wemby. Because he's got such a sturdy lower body, he can push him out of the paint and away from the basket in different situations while allowing them to keep Rudy at the basket. It's a win-win. The only question is, who should Rudy guard then? If you put him on either Champagnie or Vassell, he can't help from the corner. We've seen teams put centers on Castle historically and drop way back to make him hit shots. I think we'll see that a bit, but there are ways to attack that by using Castle as a screener or a ball handler in certain actions to switch the matchup and get him onto a spacer. If we go back to their catch and shoot guys for a sec though, I think Keldon and Bryant off the bench are gonna be who the Wolves look to take advantage of. Neither are gonna start or close games, but whenever they're on the court, I wouldn't be surprised to see Rudy take that matchup, roam into the paint, and make them hit threes. Similar to how Minnesota's entire goal on offense is going to be to pull Wemby out of the paint, that'll be the goal for San Antonio with Gobert. So that's a fun little chess match to keep an eye on. If the Spurs win that battle, even just a little bit, resistance at the point of attack is going to be everything for the Wolves in this series. Jaden and Ayo are going to have to keep the backcourt away from the paint. They're going to have to be able to handle mismatch attacking, keeping guys like Conley and Bones off the ball. If not, they'll probably have to get Jalen Clark on the floor, which would then trickle down into more problems with their offense. In my opinion, this series can go one of 2 directions. If the Spurs get shooting on the court to space Rudy out, they lack the size and athleticism around Wemby to match up with their big forwards and driving threats on the other end. So the series could turn really offense-centric. If the Spurs prioritize the defensive side of the ball, Rudy should be able to hold down the paint, which would mean a lot more iso ball from Wemby or Fox trying to win over the top. So the series would turn defense-centric, relying on their stars to hit tougher shots from the mid-range. Naturally, I think we'll see a bit of both, but the Spurs do have some overwhelming advantages in either scenario. For starters, they take extremely good care of the ball, while the Wolves tend to struggle with turnovers, especially without Ant. They're an elite transition offense, which stood out in round 1 where they just absolutely eviscerated Portland with grab-and-goes. It's important to keep in mind that if the Wolves make a deliberate effort to crash the offensive glass, they've got less defenders getting back, more opportunity for the Spurs to get out and run. For all of the tactical advantages though, the biggest advantage in this series is their talent. I will say that Minnesota has the better, more versatile wings and forwards. Outside of that though, Wembanyama is so far and away the best player in this series. Luke Kornet is the best rim protector and rebounder on the court anytime Rudy's not out there. Then the backcourt is also leaps and bounds better in both starting and bench units. Across the board, they've got more consistent rim pressure, more consistent playmaking, and less difficulty keeping their rim protector at the basket. That's not to say the Wolves can't thin out the margins. If they're able to keep Gobert at the basket, limit Wemby's rolls, and contain drives without letting either Champagnie or Vassell get open on the three-point line, they can stall San Antonio's offense. On the other side, they'll have to win their isolation matchups, dominate the offensive glass, and most importantly, hit shots. It sounds obvious, but that's the biggest swing factor. Things feel a lot more simple for the Spurs. On offense, they'll have to find ways to get Gobert out while running in transition, and when things get clogged, rely on Wemby or Fox to hit tough shots. On defense, avoid mismatches, rebound the ball. If they can execute, it shouldn't be too difficult. In my opinion, the talent gap is just too much to overcome. If Ant and Dante were available, I think we'd be in store for a 7-game series. But without them, the Spurs just have to play their game, take away the easy stuff, and they should be able to close games consistently. To me, it seems like the Wolves are going to be relying on outlier shot making from role guys, which could get them a game, maybe 2, but it isn't nearly as replicable as San Antonio's formula. So I'm going with the Spurs in an interesting, yet ultimately comfortable 5 games.